Yeah, for the longest time, I didn't define myself as a musician because I had this huge imposter syndrome because I am self-taught, and I come from a family of musicians. So I was maybe the least musician in my family, and I happened to be the one who made a living out of it. So it's very ironic, I owe it to Céline Sciamma, like many things in my life. I owe them to my friends, and when we work together, it becomes a playhouse.
Yo no sé bien qué es hacer música de cine, pero sí que hay algo en lo que me paro a pensar y me resulta muy divertido, que es la idea de que la música en el cine es un truco. Y que una vez leí una frase que decía que la música de cine era una cortina invisible que manipula al espectador.
When the DP is good, when the director is good, there is some kind of pace, the way the actors move, the way the camera moves. And finding out that tempo was a defining experience. I realized there is already music in there. I just have to reveal it.
Cuando una directora o cuando en un proyecto el silencio se utiliza bien, creo que puede permitir a las espectadoras, a los espectadores, les puede permitir completar emocionalmente la escena ellos. Esto es lo que permite el silencio y la música, sin embargo, lo que hace es forzarnos a sentir, a emocionarnos, ¿no? Para una compositora que tu trabajo cada vez tenga menos espacio es una cosa muy complicada.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Te damos la bienvenida a Cinema al Día Podcast, el inventario sonoro de algunas de las cosas que ocurren en el Festival de San Sebastián. La creación sonora para cine fue objeto de análisis de la conversación que protagonizaron el compositor, productor de música electrónica y cineasta Jean-Baptiste de Laubier, conocido como Parawan, y la también compositora de cine Aránzazu Calleja, que ejerció de moderadora y quien, por cierto, es coautora de esta sintonía junto a Maite Arrota Jauregui, Mursego. La charla estuvo organizada por el área de Pensamiento y Debate del festival en colaboración con BIME.
Arratsaldeon guztioi. Es para mí un honor presentaros a Jean-Baptiste de Laubier, también conocido como Parawan en su faceta de compositor de música de cine. Yo soy muy admiradora de su trabajo, así que estar aquí ahora mismo estoy entre feliz y nerviosísima de estar aquí a tu lado. Bueno, voy a empezar presentándole para quienes no le conozcáis. Voy a leer una notita muy breve de su currículum. Parawan nació en Orleans, Francia, en 1979. Es un artista polifacético difícil de clasificar, precisamente por su amplia y diversa trayectoria artística. Productor y creador de música electrónica, DJ, director de cine y compositor de bandas sonoras. Es el compositor de todas las bandas sonoras de Céline Sciamma, desde su primera película, Water Lilies, hasta la última, la maravillosa Petit Maman, pasando, como no, por Retrato de una mujer en llamas, película aclamada por la crítica y público, que recibió el premio al mejor guión en el Festival de Cannes y 11 nominaciones en los César. Es también director y productor de numerosos cortometrajes. Su trabajo confluye en diferentes intersecciones entre la música y el cine. Y bueno, en esta edición del Cinemaldi tenemos la oportunidad de ver dos películas con música suya. Una en sección oficial, Runner, de Marianne Matías, y otra en Nuevos Directores, La hija de todas las rabias, de Laura Baumeister. Está compuesta junto a Arthur Simonini. Y esta todavía tenéis ocasión de verla, si tenéis curiosidad de escuchar su trabajo en el cine, porque la he visto que la proyectan el domingo en el Cursal, así que... Bueno, bienvenido.
Thank you. Thank you.
¿Hay algo de tu currículum que te apetezca comentar o añadir? ¿Algo que me haya dejado o está todo correcto?
I don't know if you mentioned that I did a feature film last year, the first one, and so yeah, I'm very proud now to be able to do more than short movies because I've been stuck in the short movie zone for 20 years. Uh-huh. So yeah, Spectre is my first feature. That's the only thing but thank you.
Okay. Bueno, me gustaría comenzar comentándote así a modo de declaración que me encanta tu trabajo y que eres uno de los referentes a los que yo acudo cuando me refiero a ese tipo de perfil de músico con quien me gusta sentirme identificada y también con quien más disfruto cuando voy al cine como espectadora, que es un perfil que está, diría, más cercano al perfil de artista que al perfil de alguien exclusivamente formado en música. No sé cómo te suena esto, si es algo con lo que te sientes reconocido, pero yo cada vez me siento más cercana a esos músicos, a esas músicas que no vienen de una formación muy académica, sino que como que buscan su inspiración en otras disciplinas, y creo que desde ahí es más fácil llegar a nuevos lenguajes en el cine, que al final a mí es lo que más me interesa. No sé cómo te sientes tú con esto, si lo ves así o...
Yes, thank you. For the longest time, I didn't define myself as a musician because I had this huge imposter syndrome because I am self-taught, and I come from a family of musicians. So I was maybe the least musician in my family, and I happened to be the one who made a living out of it. So it's very ironic, About the term artist, it's a big word, but I do craft that, in various fields, and making films, writing, and composing music. But I think you have a point. At first, when it's crazy also that you say that I can be a reference for another composer, because when I started out making music for films for Céline, for example, I was just terrified. I was like, I can't do that. It's too hard for me. I don't have the knowledge. I don't know anything about it. And she insisted, and she had this trust that we had been collaborating on films before that. I was the director and she was the scriptwriter at the time. So I don't know, it feels like those 20 years passed so fast, and now I'm like, what? People are actually mentioning my name in conversations about music for film. I always felt like an outsider, and I think it's always a good position to be in. Maybe that outsider point of view also helps bringing ideas. I don't know if it's new ideas or maybe more relevant ideas sometimes. It's true that when I see professionals at work, I'm always a bit worried because, of course, we need to be professionals and we need to deliver I wake up in the morning and I work and I'm a professional in ways. But people who are in the know, people who are persuaded to have answers, technical answers to everything, it's always a bit scary because it's so fragile when you work on an idea. You have to be like a child every time. You have to be discovering your craft every time, I think. And so this imposter syndrome can become handy because you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try something every time. And when I see people who have answers and they're like, I know what should be done, it's always a very bad start.
Bueno, esto que acabas de comentar a mí me resuena muchísimo porque me siento bastante ahí, y creo que hay dos personas aquí en el público hoy que también les va a resonar mucho, que son dos músicos que entran dentro de este perfil del que estamos hablando ahora, y que desde mi punto de vista son dos de los mejores o más interesantes músicos que tenemos en el panorama estatal, que son Maite Roita-Jauregui y Olivier Arson. Así que estamos aquí muy bien acompañadas y seguro que nos entienden muy bien. Bueno, como creo que también hay bastante estudiante, creo que te voy a hacer una pregunta que es una pregunta muy clásica, pero que está muy bien saber, y es ¿cómo llegaste a dedicarte a componer música de cine? Ya sé que te dedicas a otras disciplinas, pero en concreto, ¿cuál fue el paso? ¿Cuál fue el germen de todo?
Yeah, I owe it to Céline Sciamma, like many things in my life. I owe them to my friends, and I'm very lucky to have met Céline when I was studying film. Initially I wanted to be a sound engineer and then a director, and then I met Céline, who was a scriptwriter, and she had this script for Water Lilies. She initially even asked me to direct it because she had never directed a short film. And she was like, this is not my job. I should give it to someone, this script. And of course, everybody told her, this is your story, you have to direct it. And now she became this great director. But we were scratching our heads trying to find a role for me, like maybe working with the actresses or something, being some kind of coach. I remember we had those ideas. And then she was like, you have to do the music. And I thought it was the craziest idea ever. Why? Because I was already releasing records, so it made sense because I was supposed to be a musician in ways. But I had been doing sampling and, you know, cut and paste stuff with like tape loops since I was 13 years old. So I had been doing that for like 10 years at the time, but I never took it seriously to that extent, you know, like, and so she said, yeah, for Water Lilies, I want electronic sounds. I think something organic and electronic can really fit. And so she forced me. I had no choice, and it was a very terrifying experience, but also, of course, exciting, extremely exciting. But I had been experimenting a little bit with my own films, but it was fine because it was my films, so I could, you know, mess it up, and it was just my fault, and nobody would get hurt, you know. But this was very serious, like a film with like some money, you know, some production, and I had to show up in front of people playing music, like actual musicians, and yeah, I remember making music for my own films was more like, I have no money, I don't know how to hire anyone or license music. I didn't want to be my own composer for my own films, you know, I like other people's music, you know. But I ended up doing that, and she said, but you know, you can do it. Look at what you did in this or that short film. And then I remember the very first time I tried, it was for those who might have seen Water Lilies, when they ride a bike, the two girls ride a bike, and Céline wanted me to express the melancholy of the suburban life, you know, something almost American, and that resonated, and so I tried one thing, a few notes, and I felt like, okay, this might work, you know, like. It was the first time that it's like when you learn to make movies and you put two shots together and you're like, it works. The character actually, you know, goes from this place to this other place, and it works, and we believe it. And so I had this epiphany moment on Water Lilies, and then I still need that moment every time I work with someone new. I need to try something on a scene that actually works, and then I start building confidence, like, okay, we might have something there, you know. But it was very, very fragile, and for the first two films, I think it was like that. But she was the driving force. She really gave me a lot of confidence, and she kept saying, you can do it, you can do it. And for example, the finale, you know, the final song of Water Lilies, she and her producer, who always has great ideas, by the way, they came and they were like, we need more, something, even it has to break the roof, you know, like it has to go over the top. We need like crazy, an explosion of melodies and everything. And so we came up with this idea of having a string arpeggio, you know, and I resisted. I was like, no, it's fine this way. We don't need it. It needs to be a bit quieter. And then I worked and worked and worked, and we achieved it. And then when Céline heard it for the first time, it was an incredible moment for both of us. And I know it's like our reference moment of in our friendship. When I answered to everything she had put in her movie about being a teenager, and we knew each other very well. So I put everything I felt about being a teenager, but in music, you know. And so that moment was incredible. So we were trying to relive that moment every time we worked together.
Es muy bonito esto que cuentas. O sea, que entiendo que comenzaste con Céline de una manera un poco no accidental, pero sí inesperada para ti, y han ido surgiendo películas, y ahora sí que eres un músico de referencia y trabajas mucho más allá de Céline, aunque con Céline tenéis un tándem que ya es como indivisible, ¿no? Y ahora, viendo un poco tu trayectoria como compositora, aunque tienes otras facetas, pero dedicándote a la música de cine, te pediría que nos compartieras una idea reveladora acerca de lo que es para ti ponerle música a una película, algo que sea como un tip o un motor creativo, o algo a lo que acudes cuando intentas entender qué es eso de ponerle música a una imagen.
Yeah, so talking about being terrified in front of the screen, when I put my keyboard, the first thing I did, I remember, was to turn my keyboard and make it face the screen, so that I can forget about my computer and really look at the images. And when it's like a blank page, but you know there is something that's there, but it's silent and it's very scary if you don't even have dialogue on some sequences. And Céline always gave me a lot of space, so sometimes there's literally no dialogue. There should be, the music should tell this part of the story. That's her trust in me, but like that's why it's scary. And the first time I realized that there was something there already, there was some kind of music in there, in the scene. When the DP is good, when the director is good, like in that case, there is some kind of pace, you know, the way the actors move, the way the camera moves, and finding out that tempo was a defining experience. I realized like there is already music in there, I just have to reveal it, you know. So that puts a lot of weight off your shoulders, because I mean, when people don't have a sense of rhythm, then it's a nightmare because there's nothing there. It's just pure chaos. But I mean, it never happened to me, fortunately. Yes, there is something that's already there. And when you produce electronic music, hip hop, and club music, like I did for a long time, the tempo, the pace, is a defining decision. You know, it's like. I'm also a DJ sometimes, and DJs know what a 140 BPM track sounds like. It's gonna involve stylistic choices, even like an aesthetic school, whatever, you know, like a group of people dressing up the same way because they listen to 160 BPM music, you know. And so the pace is already, I mean, there's of course the key of the song and the way it's harmonized, but the tempo is even more defining to me. And so when I find the pace of a sequence, I feel reassured. You know, I literally snap it like this in front of the screen. And that happened, for example, I used that a lot in Girlhood, because in Girlhood, the camera movements always have that specific pace, and the way the story goes forward with the character. I wanted to push the character like being the wind in the back of the character and push her through the story, through different ages of her story, different eras. And I needed that, and that pace came back again every time. There was always the same movement. And so I found out that it was around a triplet 120. So, you know, and then based on that, I could come up with different melodies and harmonizations. And but I had an idea of an arrangement already, thanks to this pace. You know, the pace implied the way the violins should be played and everything. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Bueno, a mí me está resultando muy interesante porque como yo soy absoluta fan, pues para mí esta charla es como casi como un regalo para mí. Bueno, como él cuenta una idea reveladora, yo voy a compartiros otra que lo habíamos hablado él y yo, de vamos a compartirnos alguna idea a la hora de pensar en qué es para nosotras hacer música de cine. Bueno, yo no sé bien qué es hacer música de cine, pero sí que hay algo en lo que a veces me paro a pensar y me resulta muy divertido, que te conté el otro día, que es la idea de que la música en el cine es un truco. Me gusta mucho pensar en esto porque creo que es cierto, y que una vez leí una frase que decía que la música de cine era una cortina invisible que manipula al espectador. Entonces, partiendo de esta idea y de todo lo que supone la realidad, de que en realidad es así, ¿no? Que el cine es todo, una película es un engaño tras otro, ¿no? Entonces, pensar que la música es el mayor de todos los trucos me hacía sentirme como muy como de una manera como divertida, pensando en que yo era una manipuladora de profesión, que yo en realidad me dedicaba a manipular a los espectadores y a dedicarme como al arte del engaño, ¿no? A engañar, que era una idea como un poco poética y divertida, bueno, con respecto a lo que es nuestro trabajo, que no siempre es fácil de definir y que también tiene mucha complejidad, trabajar en lo creativo y al mismo tiempo estar cumpliendo las expectativas de una directora o un director, o quien te pide que tú hagas algo, que tiene que ser creativo y personal, pero al mismo tiempo tienes que contar una historia que no es la tuya, sino la... Bueno. Y ahora, bueno, te pediré ahora que nos hables un poco de tu trabajo con Céline. ¿Cómo comenzáis? Que sé que estudiasteis juntos en la FEMIS, pero ahora, a día de hoy, por ejemplo, creo que habéis formado un tándem muy inspirador y muy referencial en el panorama del cine europeo actual, y creo que es imposible imaginarse ya una peli de Céline sin música tuya, eso es así. Entonces, ¿cómo trabajáis? O más bien, ¿qué crees que busca Céline en ti, en tu música, para sus películas?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I think it's never certain. Like it's always in balance. You know, like whether she will actually call me to compose music for her film or not. People assume that we are so close that it's obvious, but I mean, every time I'm expecting her to call me and say, "This time, I'm sorry, I'm working with someone else," and that would be actually fine. She did that with her DP, for example. So it's always, you know, there's that fragility, and but I mean, until now it's been working quite well, and I think Céline likes superhero stories in private. I mean, you can't necessarily tell when you see her films, but I think we share that superpower of being children, of staying, you know, very emotionally open. And I mean, sometimes when you're in the right state of focus, you can reach that state of being almost. Of course, she's extremely bright and smart, and she has very strong theoretical ideas every time, but emotionally, we are. If you look at the end of Water Lilies, for example, it's like she asked me to do. It's very open. It's very generous. She's very generous with her emotions, and I think I can answer to that every time, because I'm not shy when it comes to. You know, I'm not a purist, for example. I'm not. And in electronic music, we have a lot of those. You know, like people who are purists and say you can't do this, you can't do that. In classical trained musicians, you know, you can also find a lot of purists. People who I remember when I composed Finale, for example, a guy told me, you're really going in with those violins. You know, it's almost, for him it was too much. You know. But I think that's what was that being naive and trying to compose the most beautiful arpeggio like a child, you know, without the means to achieve it, made it possible. And maybe we are a bit crazy because every time we go all in and we try, like for Portrait of a Lady on Fire, the sequence was a bit crazy on paper, you know, and we were like, let's do it. So she asked for that in me every time. Same for Petite Maman, recording a choir, you know, and it was a bit of a silly idea, but we did it. And we laugh a lot. We are always cracking jokes when we work, and so I think there is this lightness when we work together, and we are both very brainy and complicated and neurotic, like a lot of people, you know. But when we work together, it becomes a playhouse. So I'm sorry, it's a very childish answer, but you know, I think. Yeah, we are not afraid to try things and to disturb each other's ideas a little bit too. You know, like it merges into some kind of, because she's really open to ideas, but she also, a very important point is that she comes up with very strong theoretical ideas first. You know, on paper it's like perfect. You know, always with Céline, it's really clean cut and everything makes sense on paper. But then we let a bit of the principle of reality in, you know. That's also what's a shooting, you know, like when you shoot, yes, the actress did not do what you expected exactly, but it's better this way because it's the spur of the moment. And so we are both very open to that. When we're in the same room, we spend a lot of time also together, much more than when I work with other people. They leave me alone a lot, but she doesn't leave me alone. She comes to the studio and we spend time together. Also with the editor, Julien, who is also one of our best friends. It's like a little family, you know. It's hard to define what she expects from me, but I mean, every time she comes up with a new idea, if you look at it, her films have very different conceptual uses of music, you know.
Antes hablabas un poco del miedo que nos entra muchas veces al enfrentarnos a una película por primera vez, o cuando alguien confía en nosotras más de lo que nosotras confiamos en nosotras mismas. Como artistas que nos boicoteamos, nos autoboicoteamos de manera como muy constante, no sé si esto lo consideras como algo inherente al acto creativo o no. Pero siempre tenemos ese síndrome del impostor o de la impostora siempre al acecho, ¿no? Entonces, no sé si te ha pasado a ti alguna vez que haya habido algún proyecto en el que el éxito del proyecto no haya ido a la par que la satisfacción personal que tú hayas podido poner en este proyecto. Esto es, o sea, a mí me ha pasado, nos ha pasado a Maite y a mí, que hemos estado en proyectos en los que ha habido un gran éxito y, sin embargo, nosotras no hubiéramos hecho las cosas de esa forma. Hemos propuesto cosas que se han ido a otro lado y hemos, de alguna forma, perdido cierto control y, sin embargo, es uno de los éxitos mayores que hemos podido de repente tener. Entonces, ¿cómo a ti te ha pasado algo así o cómo sabes separar el proceso creativo de tu satisfacción personal o del resultado final?
Yes, they say the path was the journey was the destination, right? So you're supposed to enjoy. I mean, when you get a bit older and some white hair, you realize that yes, it might be true, and you should enjoy. Like I was working yesterday on a music, for example, and I was like, this is good. This is the good moment. Like don't rush it too much. Don't be eager for it to be finished. Yes, it happened to me. This distortion between my perception and the outcome happened to me as a director when I made short films, but I mean I was very young, and also as a musician in general, you know. But I think if you keep healthy and you keep a good entourage of friends, a good group of people, then you. Okay, it's gonna sound like I'm saying it's healthy to hate yourself, but I mean, no, it's just you learn how to appreciate what you've done when you feel like it's right, and to take some distance with the eventual, maybe the success that you have when you feel like it's a little bit a coincidence, you know, like sometimes it's like that because it's not only up to you, you know, you do something that's relevant at one point, and for some reason it meets an audience, it meets a critic, something, and then people think it's amazing, and you're like, yeah, I just, you know, it's not about the quantity of work you put in, but it's about when you feel like it's not the most relevant thing you've done, but also when you travel around and you go to festival and you meet people, sometimes one person will tell you that he or she has loved that specific moment of a scene or that specific song that nobody else cares about, and you feel connected to that person. You're like, thank you, because yes, we are this small community of people who actually got it right. Who some people actually understand the purest intentions you put in your work. But there's a lot of confusion, you know, when you put out a movie. A lot of people, for example, it's in the era of social media, of course, they say they've seen a movie, but they haven't seen the movie. They've seen like a trailer, they've heard people talk about it, and they have a very strong opinion about it for other reasons than the craft and the actual outcome. But people who actually spend time, who are nerds like us, I guess, and spend time in dark rooms, you know, experiencing those emotions, they know, you know, and it's for them and for these moments that we have to keep working. And I've never been in a position to have a huge success that changes your life and everything, but I have friends who experience that, and it's I know it's hard. It's hard because people expect you to do that again and again. For example, it's better to have like longer wavelengths, you know, like very slower and longer resonances with the people.
Sí, yo estoy totalmente de acuerdo con esto que nos cuentas. Bueno, a mí me gustaría preguntarte, me parece como muy interesante conocer las influencias de quien nos influencia a nosotras. Entonces, ¿cuáles son tus influencias? No solo musicales, a nivel, no sé, artístico en general, o obras o artistas cuya impronta tú reconozcas en tu trabajo.
Well, I have to admit now, I mean, I'm realizing now that there is a huge influence of sacred music in my work. And so that's something I really didn't want to acknowledge for the longest time, because I'm a complete atheist, but I was raised in a very religious family, actually almost part of a cult. And so when I was a child and I was not even conscious of what I was hearing sacred music and religious music every day, all day. And some of those composers were friends, for example, of my father. And like I said, everybody in my family played the piano or sung, and it was all very sacred. So I came across a director who has the same background, and she told me she spent a lot of time in the church, and we fit like this. You know, it's crazy because every time I compose something, she's like, "Yes, that's exactly what I mean by the word elevation. It's that melody is like an elevation," and so that's an influence. I wouldn't say I took it on purpose. You know, but it really infiltrated my work, and actually I learned how to compose, not really to compose, but to put together a bunch of notes on an organ, you know, in a church. So I guess that's a huge influence. And electronic music is very close to that sound also. You can achieve that sound. But then, I mean, I was, okay, sociologically it makes no sense, but I spent a lot of time in a very shady and dangerous neighborhood when I was a teenager, where everybody was into hip hop. So that's I think I took something from it even in music for films, because there is this immediacy, you know, like it's in your face, you know, like it's really, there's no time to develop like long progressive stuff. It's really like in the first seconds with a hip hop track, you have it all, you know, almost. And I think that was a strong influence. But then it's too wide as a question, but I mean, the one that really triggered my desire for cinema is Chris Marker, the French director, who happens also to, I mean, I ended up exchanging letters with him for a few years, and he was I don't know how to say that in English, but he supervised my film when I graduated the film school. He was in the shadows, you know, but he was writing me emails about it, and his work. I mean, this is not an interesting story. The interesting part is that his work is Sans Soleil, for example, Sunless, is really. That's when I realized there was something about making films that was so appealing for me. And he also is a musician, and he plays around that idea because he was a musician, and because he composed music, but he signed it under other names, so it's very confusing. So you think someone else made the music for his film, but it's actually him with like a bunch of synthesizers in his studio. And his approach of the fact that the thinking and the emotions are one thing, you know, in his work. It's really like always connected, and he can be talking about very deep political, very complex issues, and I don't know, in South America, for example, but there's always emotion behind it, driving it, and it's never disconnected in terms of, for example, image and sound. There's always this very, very deep connection between the ideas, the thoughts, and the feelings. And in that sense, there's another very strong influence. That's Alexander Dovzhenko. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, you know, but he also was a big influence on Tarkovsky. But and he wrote that very, very strong sentence. He said in French is de l'émotion à l'idée, de l'émotion à l'idée, de l'idée à la pensée. So from emotion to idea, from ideas to thinking, to thoughts, you know, and it should be in that order. I mean, that I'm from that school of thoughts. So all of the artists that could achieve that, and that's a very wide range of artists. For example, Katsuhiro Otomo, the Japanese manga artist who did Akira, does the same thing. You know, he's actually talking about what's it like to live in a country that lived the apocalypse of the atomic bomb, and is able to unfold these ideas piece by piece by using characters and very, very strong emotional links. And okay, I'm being very, very abstract, but all artists that you know that do that, I feel connected to them, and they inspire me.
Bueno, para cerrar este bloque sí que me gustaría comentarte una curiosidad que este verano yo he estado en Italia y a la vuelta justo de volver de Italia estaba leyendo algo sobre ti para pensar un poco en esta charla y descubrí que comentas como algo que te gusta mucho, no sé si será cierto, lo leí por ahí, que te encanta la banda sonora del Desprecio de Godard. ¿Es así? Le Mépris. Le Mépris, yes, no lo pronuncio bien. Me hace mucha ilusión comentar esto porque yo no sabía, yo había visto la película y vi por curiosidad, por casualidad con la mansión Malaparte en Capri, y según vi la mansión a lo lejos tuve la necesidad inmediata de ponerme la música, maravillosa el tema de la película, y me resulta curioso que luego estabas tú comentando esto también, y me parece alucinante cómo hay músicas que se pegan directamente en este caso, a ese escenario tan espectacular, esa casa, ese paraíso que es Capri, esa pareja que se está deshaciendo. Entonces me hizo mucha ilusión descubrirlo porque justo fue como una conexión de estas que...
Yeah, that's the other day on the radio, because everybody knows that, but he died 2 weeks ago, and maybe less than that. But on the radio they played this song, this theme, le thème de Camille from Le Mépris. And I froze like this, and the emotion was so strong, not only because Godard had died, but I mean, it was always the case. If you play me this music, and to a lot of people, of course, it's so strong, and it drags you into this world, like you travel through time and space, and that's amazing that you could see it in Capri, hear it in Capri. But Godard himself told, because he was a provocateur, you know, he was like a bit complicated in his relationship to the media. But he said, he kept saying, okay, this is useful. Okay, in French it's guimauve, which is like a candy, you know, a candy that's a bit too sweet, you know, it's too much. But it's like, it's very useful. It's a useful candy. So I can use it to manipulate, like you said, like a trick to manipulate the audience. Yeah. Of course, he was always very distant and not that melodramatic, so he needed to, because the music was so strong, he needed to take some distance when he talked about it. But I mean, that's one hell of a candy, you know, like crazy composition. And but it says a lot about, because Delerue also, when he wrote that, clearly went all the way in, you know, those harmonies. It's, I mean, someone who would be a bit of a purist would probably be more, you know, restrained, you know, like try to keep it down a little bit. But Le Mépris goes all in, you know, this melody is incredible. And we had the chance in La Fémis, the film school I attended, we had Raoul Coutard, the director of photography of Le Mépris, who came with a brand new copy of Le Mépris to show it to us and tell us the stories behind it. And that was, I mean, I was 21 years old, I was in love, I was in, you know, studying film, and this huge film like this in Technicolor, and the music, it's a defining moment, yeah.
Bueno, si te parece bien, y os parece bien, vamos a pasar a comentar un par de escenas para ponerle un poquito de palabras al proceso creativo y de paso también poder, si surge alguna pregunta o alguna cosa que queráis comentar, podéis aprovechar. Si te parece, vamos a empezar con la escena maravillosa de Retrato a una mujer en llamas. Es la única música original que hay en la peli y tiene un gran poder emocional. A mí una cosa que me resulta interesante de lo que he leído, ahora nos lo contarás tú, es cómo comentas que Céline y tú, buscando referencias para cómo ambientar una película del siglo XVIII en Bretaña, escuchasteis danzas o músicas de la época y acabasteis por apostar por el siglo XVIII que vosotros queríais construir, ¿no? Que os permitisteis cierta licencia, que el rigor histórico no era tan importante, y me parece maravilloso que realmente ves la escena y no te cuestionas si esa música o no, que de hecho sí que a mí sí que me parece que es perfectamente creíble, pero bueno, me gusta mucho esa idea de que el cine miente realmente, ¿no?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it was funny because my family comes from this part of France, and I've heard a lot of traditional singing from that part of France, and old ones. And so when she came up with the script, because this time we were working from the script, not from the footage or for the edited, because we needed the women to sing the melodies. And so she came up with a concept, and she asked me, "What do you think? Should we investigate a little bit in the musicology field?" Because she was working with sociologists of arts to investigate what it was like to be a woman as a painter in that area, etc. So she was quite serious about being authentic and as close as possible to the historic reality. And I said, you know what? I feel like you don't want it to be that realistic for that sequence. And she said, yeah, maybe you're right. And I said, just listen to Ligeti. You know, Ligeti is very famous for his work, the use that Kubrick did of his music in many films, several films. I said, just listen to only Ligeti for the whole weekend and come back to me, you know, and maybe we will find the pace that we were looking for. And this time the pace was not in the director of photography's work. It was something we had to define beforehand. So we had to find a tempo. And she came back with an actual, it was actually quite a frantic, a very, very fast-paced tempo, like something 150 BPM. And on top of that, I suggested that we were working with Arthur, whom I co-wrote the music with, and we came up with this polyrhythmic clapping, almost like Steve Reich clapping music, you know, but in 18th century, if that makes sense, and with Ligeti on top. It's really weird. And then the excitement started to flow, and Céline was like up on her feet in the studio, and it was really a beautiful moment because we knew that it would drive the sequence. And so the next step was to actually go on set in freezing cold temperatures all night. Of course, it's a very long process. It's the big scene of the film, which is the very intimate film. I mean, it's very hard to film that, but they were literally with 2 actresses for like months. Weeks, and that night there were the singers that we hired because we invited a choir, but there were also extras singing with the professional choir, so they had to learn how to follow the pace and everything. The sound engineer had to put some kind of sound reference from what we had. And then it all came together, and of course Adele was beautiful in the light of the fire and everything. And it was a very moving moment also because Adele has been a friend as well, like Céline, for the longest time. And to see all that, you know, coming together and see her emerge as this amazing actress that she already was. But I mean, you know, the fact that you could feel that it would be an iconic moment for a defining moment for her as well. So it was a beautiful moment. But then when we came back to the studio, we had to finish and to actually mix the music. So we had a mix of direct sounds and pre-recorded sounds. And the clapping was not right. And so the funny thing is that it also says a lot about, because Céline hired, it's a decision she made, I think, on that film. She hired so many women. It was like all women on set, you know, all actresses and technical, all the leads were women. And so I hired 5 guys to do the clapping instead. I was like, because I called a friend and I said, who's going to be the best clapper, you know? And he said, I think drummers, maybe, you know, people who play bass as well, you know, they will keep it very tight. So if you want something really, really steady, because it's a complex polyrhythm, even if you're like trained. And so we were like with 4 bearded guys in the studio playing, you know, doing the clapping for this all-female choir. And I think that combination, and Céline, of course, thought it was extremely funny. And the combination of the two came together, and it was a beautiful moment too. Not to say that girls can't clap, they can definitely clap. And those women are extremely high talented, trained musicians. It's just so hard to do it in all one take with the perfect sound every time. We had to resynchronize like most of the times. That's the story. But I just remembered the beginning because I remember watching it in Cannes. There was an incredible focus in the, you know, it's a big room for the official competition, and people were so quiet and listening to the film, and the film is so quiet, and then there is this huge bump in volume because I was sitting next to the speakers. It's quite loud, and you feel like the movie is transformed by that sequence, and it's never going to be the same after that. And same goes for the relationship between the characters. And I remember one detail, if we go deep into the details, it's why I told her about Ligeti. It's because I felt like at this point in the film, while reading the script, it needed that huge shift. And I had done this experiment in South Africa with a choir. It was all teenagers, but we had some free time in the studio, and I said, okay, let's try to do some kind of a la Ligeti, you know, experiment. So you will end up in one chord, but you all start from different pitches. So they were really good at what they were doing. So they were able to individually, you know, shift their tone until they reach the right note. And so there was this dissonance in the beginning, just like this. And I had an example of that to play for Céline, and we reproduced that. Because I remember I was with a friend of mine who was filming in the studio, and he almost fell, because, you know, like the harmonic dissonance can really make you lose your internal ear balance. And so I wanted that effect, and I remember on the set it was so strange, because we played those unharmonies and everybody was like, this is a weird sequence, man. Like, you know, people who were working there, they were maybe one time working because there were so many more people on that evening. And some people really must have thought that we were actually having some kind of black mass, you know, a feminist black mass, which was the idea, basically.
Bueno, no sé cómo vamos de tiempo, si nos da tiempo, ¿no? Petit Maman, creo que es una de las pelis más bonitas que yo he visto en los últimos años, la verdad. Es una peli muy especial y bueno, en este caso hay más música en la película, en Petit Maman, que en Retrato, pero sí que hay una escena que es la que hemos elegido, que es la escena en la que la música lo ocupa todo y es como un himno, ¿no? ¿Qué buscaba Céline en este momento? ¿Qué buscaba con es una canción casi, no es que sea un tema incidental, que sí que lo es, pero tiene forma de canción, ¿no? Como si fuese un himno.
Yeah, this time I forced her to write a song. We started incorporating lyrics on Portrait of a Lady on Fire, but it's in Latin and it's a translation it's a feminist take on Nietzsche in Latin, so it's very cryptic. And this time she wanted something that would be an anthem. She said, I want children and animals to sing that in a protest to change the world, you know. This very childish approach to things. And I said, but then we need words, and you have to write them. Because at first it was all supposed to be la la la, you know, and the idea of a choir was there in the first place. Also because I had been working on my own project called Spectre, which is my first feature film, but also an album, and I had been recording the Bulgarian choirs in Sofia. And so when I played her the songs from the Bulgarian choirs, that's actually what also inspired Portrait of a Lady on Fire, to have this very strong choir. And she said, I want you now to work with choirs for me, for like the next films, you know. She wanted to have that impact. And both of us were, when we started working together, hanging out together when we were 20 years old, she bought an iPod. At the time it was cutting edge technology, and you had like 60 gigabytes. And she said, can you realize you can put a whole collection in this, so just fill it with music. And she gave me that, and I was writing the silliest names for the playlist, you know, like describing where and when you should listen to these specific songs, and etc. And one of them was the future of the past. So the idea that, you know, that melancholic idea, that melancholy for these ideas that we had as we grew up in the 80s, you know, like how it was to figure out a future, to imagine a future, but 30, 45 years ago. And for this film, obviously there is, spoiler alert, but I mean, they travel through time, and it has to be the music of the future, but from the past. And so it can't be the music of now, because it has to be an illusion. It has to be a mistake from their point of view, and it has to be cute, you know, like the way they figure out, they imagine, they figure the future, and so it has to. It was not meant to be a futuristic music for now, you know, and then I started working. I told her about there was this sentence from Brian Eno when he said, you know, the CD is going to be the melancholy of the future, the sound, the digital. This era of digital sound is going to be revered the same way we love vinyl and tape sounds now, you know. And then in the future, people are going to love those the digital artifacts and stuff like that. So I started working on sounds that would be a bit harsh, you know, like the early digital age of recording music. I know it's very nerdy, but I mean that's the way the process started. And but in that case, it's even worse for me than in Portrait of a Lady on Fire. It's like they cut the sound, and there is only music for like 3 minutes. So I have to be in charge of the narration, which is very, very scary. But I don't know, I think it might be, that's not a good thing, but it might be easier and easier with the films. You know, I mean, the melody came up quite quick. I mean, I had a melody, I tried it, I sent it over, and she said, that's it, we have it. So sometimes it happens. But I mean, the process was very long afterwards, because first of all, I had to do some arrangements that would be a bit naive, a bit like when Aphex Twin makes classical music, you know, like he borrows a friend's cello, he doesn't know how to play the cello, but he samples it, and then, you know, all this impostor stuff. And then it becomes the beautiful music that he did at the time in the 90s. So I wanted that very naive sound as well. And of course, we wanted to record a choir, and we recorded the choir from Notre Dame, you know, the one that burned in Paris, the cathedral. And it's a bunch of incredibly nerdy children who come up in the studio, and it was also COVID time, so they had to be, you know, at distance, and they just took their mask off to sing. And it was a beautiful moment also to see them record this with these very complex but very naive, but also a bit contrasted lyrics, because at some point is, if you translate it, the dream to be at last away from you, not only to be with you. You know, there is like the dream to be with you, but also the dream to be away from you, which is a very cryptic message to one's mother, if you think about it in psychoanalytic terms. Because it's about a mother. And so, and for the rest of the film, we also, I mean, we're going to see that excerpt, but for the rest of the film, I had this, I thought about Miyazaki films, of course, because her story is, the way she puts the magic in the everyday life is literally like, for example, Taniguchi, the manga artist, when it does Quartier Lointain, I don't know the English title, but it's a character who literally walks down the street and finds his childhood happening again before his eyes. And the way she does that in the film, like, you know, the little girl finds her mom in the woods, you know, like from 30 years ago. And I thought there was something very poetic about that very simple passage when you go around the corner and then there is another world, you know. And I found that in Joe Hisaishi, who composed music for Miyazaki's film, he really knows how to make that happen, to go from the mundane and the daily life to the mystery and the fantasy.
El año pasado se proyectó esta película en este mismo cine y vino Céline Sciamma a hacer un pequeño coloquio con alumnos de la Cine Escola, y yo asistí a este pase de esta peli en este cine, así que me hace mucha ilusión un año después estar aquí contigo hablando de la película. Bueno, hemos comentado, por supuesto, esto es una conversación acerca del trabajo de Jean-Baptiste que es interesantísimo y bueno, pues como habéis visto hay muchas cosas para contar, pero hemos hablado de la posibilidad de compartir escenas de ambos, así que yo he traído una escena también. Have you seen it?
Yes, I have.
Ok. Me parecía bonito que pudiéramos cerrar el coloquio comentando escenas de ambos, y bueno, yo he elegido una escena de una película en la que he trabajado recientemente, bueno, el año pasado, pero ahora mismo está también aquí en el Cinema-Aretoan, que es 5 lobitos, y es una película, como antes hablábamos de procesos creativos y de cuánto nos separamos de un proceso creativo del resultado final. Para mí esta película es un claro ejemplo de una película en la que el proceso creativo no fue fácil, pero el resultado supera todo lo que ha ocurrido, porque todo tiene mucho sentido y todo lo que ocurrió tenía una dirección, digamos, clara, y siempre pasa esto cuando quien dirige hace las cosas bien. Entonces, para mí el gran descubrimiento de 5 lobitos fue que Alauda a mí me pidió que buscara la manera de acompañar a Amaya en su viaje emocional, ¿no? Amaya es la protagonista, supongo que habréis visto 5 lobitos por aquí. Entonces yo tenía que acompañar a Amaya en el viaje. En ese viaje tenía que hablar de cotidianidad, de rutinas, del ciclo de la vida, y todo esto con un punto de vista o una instrumentación particular. Ella no quería lugares comunes, esto era un poco una indicación que ella me dio. Entonces yo empecé a trabajar con instrumentos no típicos. Lo que os voy a enseñar ahora es algo que yo hice con un buzuki y un violín. Entonces, esto es una de las primerísimas muestras que yo le pasé, vais a verla, pero no está en la película. Y fuimos poco a poco, de manera gradual, eliminando no música, sino eliminando elementos expresivos, instrumentos, melodías, cada vez era todo más atmosférico para llegar casi al silencio. Entonces, lo que yo he descubierto con esta película, que me conmovía mucho también por lo que es la película en sí, que es muy conmovedora, pero además para una compositora que tu trabajo cada vez tenga menos espacio es una cosa muy complicada de llevar. Entonces, lo que yo fui entendiendo es que cuando una directora o cuando en un proyecto el silencio se utiliza bien, creo que puede permitir a las espectadoras, a los espectadores, les puede permitir completar emocionalmente la escena ellos. Esto es lo que permite el silencio, y la música, sin embargo, lo que hace es forzarnos a sentir, a emocionarnos, ¿no? Entonces, la directora en todo momento decía, es que esto no puede ser porque estás hablando mucho con la música. Entonces yo estaba un poco desesperada porque era muy complicado cada vez hacer menos. Y bueno, finalmente, si da tiempo, me gustaría enseñaros una muestra de lo que yo hice. Muy al principio eso desarrolló en muchas ideas, y finalmente esta escena es la escena final, que va en silencio y tiene pleno sentido por lo que es la peli, que habla mucho de lo que no se dice, porque no sabemos, porque no podemos, o porque no hay que decirlo, o por lo que sea.
So you see that you've found the pace of the sequence, you know, the tempo of the sequence. You found it. Because when I watched it without and with, I realized that it was already there. You just revealed it, you know, in ways. Just to make the point that I was making about finding the tempo beforehand, you know, maybe in an unconscious way or something. But.
Sí, esto es una de las cosas que, como bien decías antes, cuando yo encuentro el tempo de esa melodía que va al tempo de la imagen y siento como que pertenece, como si fuese que pertenece a la imagen, ahí es cuando disfruto mucho del trabajo. Lo que me resultaba muy curioso y me costó mucho comprender, y ahora estoy muy, muy contenta de que sea así, es que esta película, aunque te ofrece lugares que objetivamente son ideales para acompañar con música, hubiera sido otra peli distinta. Es muy distinto. El silencio absoluto te agarra más, te da más. En esta película, por lo menos, creo que es lo que la gente que la ha visto y ha comentado, y hemos hablado acerca de la poca música que tiene. Sí que al final todo el mundo coincide en que la falta de música te lleva a un lugar distinto. Entonces, esto también es algo a tener en cuenta. En este caso, la directora tenía muy claro esto, o llegó a esto de una forma clara. Pero si no te dirige una persona que lo tenga tan claro, tú puedes convertir la película en otra cosa distinta. Esto es lo que me parece como muy... que se nos va de, ¿no?, hasta qué punto está en nuestro control. Es complicado. Una de las cosas que a mí me gustó mucho, me sentí muy orgullosa de leer, al mismo tiempo me puso muy triste, pero me sentí orgullosa de leerlo. Lo leí en Pícara Magazine, lo escribió Aránzazu Calleja, y dijo, en esta película el silencio ha sido compuesto, como si el silencio fuese una elección mía, que bueno, todo es muy poético y todo puede ser, ¿no? Pero que tú como compositora firmes el silencio es un poco es un poco complicado.
Yeah, and sometimes it's difficult stories. I remember scoring a film for a friend of mine, and when he watched, because when the two examples we saw of my work were obviously the opposite. It was super maximized because, for example, in Petite Maman, what we don't see when we see the excerpt, is that she's actually listening to music on her headphones, like blasting the full volume. That's why it's so loud. But I was composing music for the first film of a friend of mine, and he kept saying, I think it's beautiful, it's a bit too beautiful, you know, and it was always about, I mean, when you compose music, you're trying to make it beautiful, I mean, most of the times. And he kept peeling those layers off, you know, and I think he was right, but you have to, of course, the ego must stay in the other room, you know, when you do that. But he was right that the film needed less and less and less, and then when you find that thin balance, and at the end it could be complete silence, it could be just one note, then it's a beautiful thing too, because it's another way of collaborating. But I remember another friend telling me for electronic music, club music, because he's an amazing DJ, one of those DJs who make it an art form almost. When I was producing music when I was younger, he kept saying, don't put too much, because you're depriving the listener of his dream. You know, like you need to give space for that dream, that especially in a club, which is a very loud and not very defined environment. You know, like you must have very few elements that suggest something, and then everybody's going to bring their own dream with them, which is very important. I think in film scoring is the same. There's so many things happening already that you need to know your place, and sometimes it's to be absent, you know.
¿Tenemos tiempo para preguntas? Pues una pregunta se puede hacer.
Sí, hola, buenas tardes y muchísimas gracias por esta charla tan magistral. Yo simplemente, la pregunta mía es, os pregunto a los dos, y es, si vosotros, uno de vosotros, fueseis la película, en persona, la película, ¿qué parte de vosotros sería la música en esa película?
Esto es una pregunta muy poética. Bueno, pues...
My left foot, I think. No, I wouldn't say the heart. I mean, it's too obvious, because it would be the heart, but I mean, the romantic answer would be that. But like you said, it's one of the tricks, the music. It's like, and cinema is all tricks, basically, and
Yes,
and
exactly.
some heart behind it. But you know, it could be a fake arm, you know, or you know, the music.
The stomach. Oh.
Yes, the stomach, because it's also where the fear is.
Cualquiera menos el corazón.
Thanks for the talk. It's very nice to see how you craft your work, like 2 scenes with different approaches. And I'm very interested in how you work with like the sound beyond music, like atmosphere and dialogue and Foley. And since you said like the version that went to the film was silent, but there were a bunch of sounds, and how you relate, if you think you collaborate artistically with sound editors, sound designers, or you think it's different fields, and how like processual you like to go on the sound stage with the sound mixer and see how the sounds are going to the main speaker, or how you explore surround, and how you deliver your tracks to the sound editor, if it's like a lot of stems, everything is open, or you like to pre-mix yourself and deliver something which is close. I don't know, many questions.
Wow, it's a whole masterclass right there. Oops. Well, of course, when you come from electronic music, and when you're from my generation, I spent so much time doing kind of sound design work. I mean, at least I thought it was the case. But when I directed my first feature, I realized, I mean, I had realized that before, but that, yes, sound design is like a whole other world. You know, it's a job, it's a craft, it's people who spent 40 years of their lives doing that. And so you should not think, as a musician, I think, that you will know better, you know, like, oh yeah, I come up with those great atmospheres for you, you know, this sound design, they're going to be like, I've been recording birds and weird sounds for like 30 years. So you have to be open to the dialogue with the sound designer, and that could be an amazing collaboration. And of course, you can also add layers and diffuse this border between real sound and fictional sound and musical sound. Obviously, the progression in the technology and the advances and also for example, works of David Lynch, for example, brought that to the public, the idea that even like a ventilation can become part of the music or the narration. So we all know that, and most of us love doing that. But I think I see it as another element of collaboration, which is very, very strong between the mixer, the sound editor, sound designer. That could be also the same person, but you shouldn't go too much overboard, I think. As for the technical aspects, I mean, it's a bit of a long question. I mean, personally, I deliver stems, and then the specialization I used to mix the music specialized at the time. And now I realize that it needs to be part of the sound design, especially in terms of spatialization. And I was a sound editor for Sakamoto when he did the music for a French film, and he delivered like 5.1 stems that were perfectly mixed and everything. But it's he's a master at this now, and it's hard to reach that. And I think when you're a bit of an amateur like me, you have to come up with like a bunch of stems, and then the sound engineer will know better in terms of narration and where to focus, for the audience to follow the action, because we get carried on with the music and we get overwhelmed as musicians, and we want it to be, I don't know, loud and everywhere, but it's not the way it's going to work.
Bueno, tenemos que terminar ya. Ha sido un placer. Gracias.
Thank you very much.
Por venir a conversar con nosotras. Y nada, espero que lo hayáis disfrutado.
Thank you for coming.
Hasta aquí ha llegado este nuevo episodio de Cinema al Día Podcast, englobado en las actividades del área Pensamiento y Debate. Puedes escuchar más conversaciones y clases magistrales en nuestra página web o en la plataforma que prefieras para escuchar audio. Hasta la próxima. Hurrengo arte.